In today's video, I'm going to show you how to set your S95B up to your liking and go through all the settings that you may not even know about and show you how to get some of the best looking HDR possible. Before I begin, I just want to note that we are on the 12.11 update that has recently been released. If you're watching this in the future and you're on a different update, make sure you check some of my latest videos to see if anything has changed. First, I'm going to talk about basic settings that you need to absolutely change, and then we're going to go through SDR, HDR, and then wrap it up with gaming. So, hope you guys enjoyed this content, and if you do, make sure you do hit the like button and consider subscribing at the end of this. Also, if you're buying a soundbar or a new gaming console to pair with your S95B, I would appreciate it if you guys did so with the links below. Thank you guys so much. Alright, without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so we can't talk about settings unless we first talk about the remote. The first thing you are going to notice with your S95B is there is no real way to change the input without being a pain or a hassle. So here's the absolute fastest way to get to your input devices. So you're going to want to hit the home button, then the multi-view button, and then you're going to want to scroll up to connected devices. Click that and then you can see all of your inputs. This is the fastest way to get to your inputs. So hopefully that gives you a way to access your inputs a little bit faster now. Now the real solution would be for Samsung to give us a firmware update to let us just do a long press on the settings button and give us our inputs. I think that would be a really easy solution to do, considering if you hold the play button down, you get the game bar menu, and if you hold the mute button down, you get the accessibility shortcuts. So yeah, holding down the settings button and getting inputs would be great. Next, let's talk about how you get to your settings menu the fastest. So you're going to want to hit the 1, 2, 3 key, aka the settings button. So press that once and then scroll up with the D-pad and then you can see your settings. Now this next setting you're going to probably want to change no matter what. It will affect your brightness, so listen up. You're going to want to hit the settings button, then you go down to general and privacy, and then you go to power and energy savings. This is where you're going to disable all of those things that you don't want on that will affect your brightness. I also want to note that you're going to want to check this setting again when you're in a different picture mode just to be sure. So if anything ever looks off to you, it's important you check this setting, especially if you think things are looking dim all of a sudden. Really quickly, before I get into SDR, we're going to talk about updating your software. So we're going to hit the settings button, go to software update, and check for the latest update. This is how you get the OTA updates. If you want to learn how to get the USB updates, check out my 12.11 firmware video where I actually do go through that. So let's go through SDR settings right now. For my settings, I'm going to want a little bit more pop with my SDR, and you know, it still looks to me like I'm still getting the creator's intent to a degree. So I'm really happy with my SDR settings. Copy them if you want. Again, it is totally going to be up to you. Alright, on the screen right now, I'm going to go ahead and show you my SDR settings. Brightness is at 47. Contrast I have at 39. If you have this at max, you will clip contrast. And I am going to be using contrast enhancer for these settings as well. So I am lowering the contrast quite a bit so I don't clip. And the reason why I use contrast enhancer is because I do get a little bit more pop. And that is one of those things where I will use it for SDR, but I won't use it for HDR, but more on that later. My color tone is going to be at warm 2. My gamma is going to be at BT 1886. Now I set this to -3 and then shadow detail is at +2. This way I felt like I had a more balanced image and I didn't crush out too many shadows. I really liked the way this looked entirely for my SDR image, so that's why I went with it. Alright, for my color space, I went with normal for this, and honestly, I really actually like the way normal looks in comparison to what I got from auto. And I first noticed this when I was playing SDR games. Auto just sort of felt washed out at times. I don't know what's going on out of the box with that, but it just doesn't look right to my eyes. So I went with normal and then I decreased the color to 18 so that we wouldn't get some oversaturation. There may be a little bit too much red for some people with normal, but I actually like it. I think it looks pretty good and it fits sort of what I was going for with my HDR presentation for this TV too. So when I switch from SDR to HDR, things aren't really thrown off for me. So that's why I went with normal. I won't talk about white balance because I do feel like there's way too much panel variance with that in regarding this TV. The 55-inch I had was close to perfect. The 65-inch I had was pushing too much green. So I can tell you for a fact my white balance probably won't work for yours. So I'm just not going to give it out. And it's not that much adjustments anyway. I just pulled out a little bit of red. By all means, change anything you like. And honestly, I encourage you to change things you like and play around with these different settings. At the end of the day, you can always hit the reset button and change the settings back to default and use somebody else's settings. That's the great thing about TVs is you just do it towards your liking. And that's why I am a big advocate of picture preference. I think that is the funnest way to do TVs, and I think that is the best way to watch TV is your preference, because at the end of the day, you know what your eyes like, so just set it up that way. Okay, so that was my movie mode SDR settings, and I use a similar settings for game mode as well, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now let's get into HDR, my favorite. So for out of the box picture accuracy with the 1211 update, just use Filmmaker Mode all the time for your movies. If you want the creator's intent, that's the one you're going to want to go with. Now, if you want a little bit more pop and you don't care about the creator's intent all that much, you will lose some picture depth using these settings, but these are just alternatives. Now, Filmmaker Mode is definitely my go-to after the update. I really love it. Like, I'm just being honest with you. It is my favorite way to watch HDR movies right now. And yeah, this TV is incredible after the update, and I recommend Filmmaker Mode for sure. But those of you that think Filmmaker Mode might be a little too dull for your taste, here's some settings that might help. Now, I do have one tweak that I do to both movie and Filmmaker Mode, and that is the color space. For every HDR content that I watch, every HDR game that I play, I change my color space settings to BT 2020. And before you think this isn't going to look natural or this isn't going to look accurate, well, I can tell you for a fact that I had this next to the G2 for a while now, and it looks pretty similar when it is side by side using the BT 2020 color space. Yeah, that's the one I recommend for sure. If you have 90% coverage, you might as well use it, right? All right, so let's move on to the actual settings. All right, so now for my settings in movie mode with a little bit more pop. The brightness, you're going to want to keep this at 50. Contrast, you can keep this at 50 as well, but you may need to pull it down if you notice some clipping. So far, it seems to be pretty decent, and I don't notice a ton of clipping. After the update, they seem to clean that up a lot. Again, though, to be honest, I watch mostly in Filmmaker Mode, so I can't really give you a whole description of what's going on with movie mode, and if it clips a lot, then just take down the contrast. But like I said, I rarely noticed it when I was testing movie mode after the update. So color is going to be at 25 for this. I do want a little bit more color in this mode, so I just keep it at 25. At Filmmaker Mode, I bumped it down to 20 to match the G2, but this setting is going to be just about getting a little bit more pop to it, right? So that way I could toggle between movie and Filmmaker Mode whenever I want to. So for the ST2084, you kind of have to bump this down to -3, or else you will notice that some scenes are going to feel way too over brightened, and it's going to kind of ruin the atmosphere in a lot of scenes. So if you want to have some good depth to your picture still, you're going to want to use -3 on the ST2084. When you do this, you will crush some shadows. You will notice that, so you're going to want to bump that up to make up that difference as much as you can. Again, these are all going to be personal preference, and you can change any setting you want. So if you don't want the ST2084 that low and you're fine with a little bit of a lifted picture, just keep it at default. Contrast enhancer is going to be off for me. Now, you could use it if you want, but I do notice that you are going to clip some colors, you are going to clip some highlights, you're going to lose some shadow details sometimes. I'm just not a fan of contrast enhancer in HDR because it does just bring too much downside. Now, there's a couple of things that I want to point out with the movie mode is compared to Filmmaker Mode, you are going to get some aggressive tone mapping. So that is why we're using the movie mode on this example. Alright, that's it for the HDR. Let's move on to game mode. Okay, so there's a few things you need to know about game mode. Out of the box, default modes are terrible. So you're gonna want to change that. And you're also going to remember that when you hold the play button, you can get the bar to come up, the game bar. You are going to be able to select different presets that way. And every time you change the settings within the preset, they will stay. So you can pretty much set up game mode exactly how you want. Now for gaming, I pretty much use very similar settings to my SDR settings for SDR gaming, except for I do keep the peak brightness at high, and I make sure that the brightness is at 50. I just like the brightest game possible for SDR game mode. And I also will crank up the color a bit. So here is my SDR settings. Alright, moving on to HDR game mode settings. Here we're going to just bump the ST2084 down to -3. And pretty much keep everything else cranked up. Like, I don't touch color. I think I keep color at 25. And that's about it, really. -3 on the ST2084 because it is over brightened a bit in game mode. I keep shadow detail at 0. And the color space is BT2020 for HDR. Now this next thing is the most important thing that you can do when gaming in HDR. You're going to want to hold the play button down till your game bar pops up and then scroll over to the right to game settings and then find where it says game HDR, toggle that on. That is your HGIG. Trust me, you're going to want to use it with the Samsung TV. It makes the games look amazing. Another thing that I absolutely love is Game Motion Plus. Yes, try to engage this sometimes. It is really great for 30 frames per second games. If you want to make it feel more like it is a 60 frames per second experience, try it out. Judder 10, Blur 0 on 30 frames per second. And if you're playing a 60 frames per second game, try Blur 10 with Judder 0. The caveat to this is you do have to be in 60 Hz output or else it won't work. It will be grayed out. So you're going to have to pick whether or not you want the motion for your gaming or if you're going to want to play in 120 Hz with VRR. This does not work with VRR at 60 Hz either, so it's going to be one of those things you have to choose. Also, please keep in mind this does add about 10 milliseconds to the input lag, so you are going to have a little bit more input lag, but honestly, it is very, very playable, and I highly recommend it for a lot of RPGs and really a lot of Nintendo Switch games. Alright, if you enjoyed this video, please give a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and check out the videos after this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next one.